Thank you. Well, it was easy to see the beauty in that. Just over 3 weeks ago now, I walked out the back door to get some firewood and slipped on ice. And I would have loved to have seen a video of what happened. I'm sure my feet got up above my head. It came down very hard on my left kidney on the edge of the step. And guys don't like pain. I think if guys gave birth, we'd think we were dying. I asked the doctor in the hospital when I got there, and he quietly confirmed that guys are kind of wusses when it comes to pain. This was really painful. And my scream, I think, could have been heard in Medford. My wife was inside, and it wasn't fun for her. Of course, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, laying in the ice and the snow. And a couple of moments after it happened, I felt myself wrapped in the most incredible feeling of peace, and the pain vanished. And a name showed up. It was, and I'm not into stuff like this usually. I don't really hear voices all the time, just want to let you know. But I heard a voice in that moment say, I am the comforter. Very distinctly. And as I lay there in the ice and snow, put my hand behind my back on the spot where I'd landed, and I noticed that I was sort of stroking it, and I heard myself saying things. It's an odd experience. I was in shock, right? But the words were, we are rewinding, we are minimizing the damage, we're reversing the trauma, healing will be swift and full. I'm like, okay. And then I lost consciousness. And I came to with my wife screaming in my ear. And of course, terrible for her. She didn't know what was happening. And apparently I said, am I in a dream? Which is how it felt. So then the medics arrived and got to the hospital and so forth. But on the way to the hospital, I began doing the visioning process that I do for everything. I imagined myself driving home from the hospital knowing that I didn't need surgery, my back would heal, and not have much pain. And I did it verbally. I asked the medic in the ambulance if he minded. And he said, okay. And after I did about a 5-minute visioning process, he said to me, I'm a coach. I coach boys in high school for wrestling and football. And I always do some intention setting with them, but I really like your process, so I think I'll do it. So as I was being wheeled into the hospital on a stretcher, I thought, I just did a coaching session. That's a workaholic. Anyway, I learned that I broke L1 and L2. Fractures in what's called the transverse process. Great phrase. However, shortly after that, I was driving home with my wife, feeling great and knowing that I wouldn't need surgery, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think I took 6 ibuprofen over the next day or two. Next day, and then the pain really subsided, and healing has been really, really swift. And apparently I'll be good as new. I'm telling the story because I used my imagination to reframe my situation. Because if I'd landed a couple inches to the right, I could have snapped my spine, inch or two above or inch or two below, broken a hip, broken ribs, and I didn't do any of that. But I found that in the days after the fall, I would kind of have this terrible memory of what had happened. It was really traumatic. And I'd feel terror going through my body. And at some point I realized this is not healthy to have that happening. So I decided to reframe the memory, and here's what I came up with. I fly up into the air where I'm caught by angels. and carefully lowered onto the best possible spot to do the least amount of damage. And I'm feeling a tremendous amount of peace. I had to run that about 50 times. I didn't count, but I'm guessing. Because it would keep coming up, and I go, oh, okay. And then I'd rework the memory. And then finally, it hit the tipping point, and now when I think of that follow, I feel blessed by angels. So I wanted to mention that this morning because it's a good example of how we can take something and see the beauty in it, but do more than just see the beauty, actually create the experience we want. I wanted to have, in fact, a breakthrough experience. Friends heard me say about 2 or 3 weeks before this event a very odd phrase that I've never said before. I would say something like, I feel like I'm getting ready to crack through something. I remember saying it at least 3 times. So there was a little premonition. And this morning we are going to be working with time. The subtitle of my book, the book is called Now or Never. The subtitle is A Time Traveler's Guide to Personal and Global Transformation. So we will be doing some time traveling this morning. We're just setting up for that. I'd like to invite Anya up to read a poem which I reprinted in my book. And this, I'd like you to appreciate as a challenge for Anya. Anya is one of the most poetic, sacred goddess people I know. And I have asked her to read a pretty clunky poem. It's like instructional. I got one later, which I'm going to read. Sorry, Anya, I should let you read that one. But this is instructional, so this lays a little bit of groundwork for our experience together. So, Anya?
A great introduction. I just really feel the beauty of your story. So how do I get turned on? Okay. Is it okay? Yeah. Anyway, thank you for the beauty of the story, and thank you for that imagine. I heard Imagine sung here last week, and it just brought tears to my eyes again, because that's really the truth of who we are. So this is a reading by Michelle Hunt. I don't know who she is. Now more than ever, we need to imagine our future, to see the world we want to create. This is what I call visioning. The sea of change we are all living in also calls us to ask some crucial questions. What's important? What values do we need to embrace and build into future? What kinds of organizations, institutions, communities, and lives do we want to create together? People are struggling with these questions in all sectors of life, in our families, work, communities, and governments. Moreover, there seems to be a growing desire or need to live on purpose, to be deliberate about how we shape and live in organizations and communities. A whole level of accountability and responsibility is therefore required. A whole level of accountability and responsibility is therefore required.
Thank you, Anya. Well, besides there being some valuable words in there, I'm sure we can all feel how the room here changed the minute Anya got up here, right? Before she said a word. And why is that? It's because of who Anya is. And it's true for each one of us. Our presence precedes us. So tonight's a special night. Why is that? Oscars. 3 hours of distraction.
I think it's a new moon today.
Well, it's a new moon too, but I'm sure the Oscars are more important. So, the Oscars are all about storytelling, and we need a new story. We need a new story about the future. Doing research for my book, because I'm a big film buff, I researched future scenarios, like science fiction films. Since 1952, there's been hundreds of science fiction films that depict the future in dystopian terms. In other words, it's really screwed up. Last year, Mad Max, won like 6 Oscars or something. I don't know if you saw it. It's not that hopeful. There's also exactly one film that Google at least acknowledged as a hopeful picture of the future. You know what it is? What would you say was the most hopeful futuristic film you can think of? 2001. Stanley Kubrick. And if you re-look at that film, it's like you're on another planet. Because the texture, the pacing, the vision, and the hopeful ending is incredible. So we don't see a lot of that now. I'd like to see more. This year, nominated for 14 Oscars, La La Land. I think that's really timely, exactly what we need given the crises on the planet. La La Land. I know I'm being judgmental, but that's because I'm human. I'm mentioning it because I'd like us to do something right now to get out of our normal state, because we're going on an adventure. And we need to kickstart it in storytelling. There's what's called the instigating event, which throws the protagonist off his equilibrium, and then the rest of the story is about him establishing balance on a new level. So I'd like you to introduce yourself to someone as a different person. Now, actors do this all the time. Brad Pitt's always playing someone else. So I'll give you an example. Hi, my name is Dorothy. I'm a tap dancer from Topeka, Kansas. I'm a single mother. I have 2 young daughters named Janice and Sam. Sam, isn't quite sure. So, why don't you do the same? See, that wasn't hard. Pick a name. You could be George. You could be Sally. And just introduce yourself to someone. The point is to feel yourself stretching in your imagination to challenge who you think you are. Because who you think you are isn't who you really are. And we're going to be focusing on getting over the habit of being yourself. Okay, go ahead. He looks a little different than he does on screen. Anyone need someone interesting? Brad Pitt is here. Brad Pitt is in the house.
George Clooney.
George Clooney, okay. Well, I've lost the women in the audience. Francis the Talking Mule. Great. Okay, so you get the idea. Yeah.
My name is Hoppy the Rabbit, and I have just sold my ears and had them made into silk purses, and I'm stringing them around my neck to hold all my agates and marbles.
Okay. Great. So it's really fun to get out of our confines, the limitations of who we think we are. And we're going to need that as we forge ahead here, because we have some really interesting terrain to cover. I mentioned actually the title of a book that my friend Grant told me about, Getting Over the Habit of Being Yourself, written by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And great book, by the way, I recommend it. He was in What to Believe. Some of you might remember him from there. And he mentions a study done in 2000 by an Israeli doctor on the power of prayer. And I'm just going to read the relevant part here. 3,393 hospital patients suffering from sepsis, which is infection, were divided into 2 groups. And the intention was to determine if prayer at a distance could affect a measurable influence. This was, I think, a triple-blind study, so this was a legit study. The results proved that those who were prayed for, quote, benefited from an earlier decrease in fever and a shorter hospitalization time. It was remarkable. But the people who were doing the praying weren't told that the people they were praying for had been hospital patients 4 to 6 years earlier. They were praying for people who'd been sick in the past. And it affected their health in the past. Okay? So, how do you explain that? How do you explain that something done in the present could affect the past? Well, in the quantum world, there is no linear time. Past, present, and future are joined. The way Hawkins describes it in Power versus Force is ABC are locked together. Past, present, future are one entity, one reality. And then it bifurcates, it splits into sequential A, B, C. So you have past, present, future, which in our experience seems to be a law. We go from the past to the present to the future. But originally, it's all bound together. The intermediate step is where we are. If we apply this to human experience, those were the prayers. Those who are doing the praying. So in other words, we have the power to not only change the future, but to change the past. Wow. Think about that. So right now, you could return to a memory of trauma. I told you my story of my dad, my fall. You could pick something in your memory and go back there right now. Just we time travel all the time. Think about driving here, going back in time. So just imagine some memory in the past and visit it. Just notice what's going on there. It's possible to examine a memory separate from it and to notice what's going on, identify what's happening. For instance, an abusive situation. You might become aware of horror and pain, suffering. And it's still living in you because it's still real. And it's possible to visit a scene like that and also identify what would heal the situation. Love, forgiveness, gentleness, compassion, care. And it's possible to author a new script relative to that memory by simply holding it like you'd hold a child and lovingly caress that memory with the qualities that you would like to seed there. And then the fascinating thing is to come back to the present moment and feel, which a person can learn to feel, almost, I call it the slinky effect. Remember slinkies? Those are great. Get a slinky on the stairs, it goes down the stairs, and the front goes and then the back catches up with it. Well, when you do this, you can feel the slinky effect as you return to the quote present and feel the change in that story rippling forward into the present. Really interesting to play with that. So we can change the past, I did with my injury, and we can change the future, but what are we changing the future into? I mentioned consciously participating in creating a future for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. Well, what would it be like? I've got a beautiful poetic description of it here. This is from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Familiar with him? Priest. Here's what he wrote, and this is so evocative. He's referring to the future that he could see, and Stanley Kubrick could see this future possibility. And this morning we have the opportunity to see, to vision a different future. Like a vast tide, being will have engulfed the shifting sands of being. Within a now tranquil ocean, each drop of which, nevertheless, will be conscious of remaining itself. The astonishing adventure of the world will have ended. The dream of every mystic, the eternal pantheistic ideal, will have found its full and legitimate satisfaction. That's a grand vision. Mass enlightenment on the planet. Why not? Why not vision something like that? Would it hurt us? I mean, I told a story in a workshop I was doing in New York many years ago about it's imaginary, theoretical, about a guy who gets diagnosed with a terminal condition. And his doctor tells him he's got a year to live. And then he goes to a workshop or church service or reads a book that says humor can help your health. And so he agrees and he starts watching funny videos and comedians, and he goes to sports improv events, and he laughs. And he just laughs for the full year up to the time when he's supposed to die, at which point he drops dead. Apparently laughing didn't help him at all. So my question was, don't you think he'd really be angry that he wasted the year being happy when he could have been uptight? I mean, it matters if it works, but how much? Like, if we can improve the quality of our lives, isn't that worth something?
Yeah.
So, that's the good news. Bad news, it's not really bad news, but I kind of like that good news, bad news thing. Good cop, bad cop. Storytelling device. Bad news is that we can't create the new until we've done something with the old. The old is like a cloak that holds us in. Like when you addressed a friend and said, I'm George or whatever, you had to let go of the old identity. And it was just a little exercise for a minute. Hopefully it was fun. But to do what we're talking about requires something much, much deeper. Letting go of things that we're really attached to. The one in particular that we're going to get to in a moment. I did a seminar in Victoria years ago where we went in and the room we'd rented was filled with stale smoke and beer smell. I don't know what went on there the night before, but it wasn't a spiritual event. And so we were preparing it for our talk, which was supposed to be inspirational. It didn't feel inspirational in that. So somebody put on some beautiful flute music, something like Donna would play. No inference to Donna at all, but the flute music didn't go anywhere. Like it just didn't change anything. So someone got an idea. Their son liked listening to heavy metal music. So she found a cassette tape of his. It was back in those days, AC/DC or Twisted Sister, one of those mellow groups. These days it would be Disrupted, is it? Get their name. And we put on that tape and turned it up full blast and went outside because we couldn't stand being inside. And this was some wicked music. Like, it was really disruptive. It was painful to hear. And we left it on for a couple of minutes, and then we went back inside, turned it off, and then we put on the flute music. And guess what? It did the trick. Then we got a great atmosphere, and we could proceed with our meeting. And I've never forgotten that because we had to disrupt the old pattern to create the new one. What are we living in right now in the United States of America? Extreme disruption. And when we complain about it and judge Trump and his cronies and say there's something terrible, we are absolutely reinforcing old patterns. Am I saying that he's a saint? I don't think I said that. The point is, what vibration are we contributing to the planet? Doesn't mean being in denial. I'm not talking about being in denial. I hurt my back. That was real. I went to the hospital, took drugs. So we don't deny the reality. In fact, we wade right into it, which is what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a story out of this book, Care of the Soul. Thomas Moore, you know the book? Yeah. It is one of those books that just brings you to tears throughout it. So it's a kind of a long story, so if you don't mind, I'd love to read this. And if you can, just flow with the meaning in the story. There's a reason that I picked this out of the 300 pages. He's talking about a cousin of his who became a nun at an early age and was completely devoted to God. And she was luminous. Just one of these beings who you're around and they just light up in their presence. Whenever she talked about theology or meditation or education, she would laugh heartily, like a spiritual teacher who always perceives the ironies and absurdities of this life. That curious mixture of high spirituality and practicality showed itself as well in two passions of hers. She spent many summers getting degrees in science and then taught science courses in various high schools run by her order. She also studied Zen Buddhism and Eastern meditation practices in a day when ecumenism was frowned upon. Whatever she was doing or talking about, you could feel in her an extraordinary purity of intention and unlimited commitment. One day, she discovered that she had a rare, painful, and fatal disease. Gradually, she had to give up her teaching and spend more time just taking care of her body. For several years, she suffered intense physical pain and discomfort. She would go from one doctor to the next, gathering a few new pieces of information about her unusual condition. At one point, she said she probably knew more about her disease than any doctor in the country. Characteristically, she arranged her life the best way she could. She studied her illness, and she developed her own regimens of self-care. Then, in the midst of her illness, the pain and disruption in her life took their full toll. She lost her faith. This was someone who had spent her entire life cultivating her spirituality and giving herself completely to her religion. She told me that she'd become profoundly depressed during one of her hospitalizations. Everything she believed in collapsed into a deep, dark hole. And she felt that all her previous efforts to live an honest, principled life had been in vain. She called for a priest, but rather astonishingly, when she told him about her loss of faith, he dashed out of her room. She said she long remembered the image of his back as he hurriedly pushed open the door to get away from her doubt and depression. She had no choice then but to sink into her black emotion. She'd never thought, in all of her studies, training in spirituality, that she could have such a crisis of faith. She expected a continuous ascent in understanding and technique, with maybe a few small, surmountable problems here and there. But her fate led her in a different direction, to a place void of spirit and dominated by utter hopelessness. She was then led deep inside herself to the very edge of the person she knew herself to be, empty of all spiritual ambition and all satisfaction in what she'd accomplished. She had no guides, no hints at where to go next. She had no life in front of her and no one to talk to. She'd read about the Eastern concept of emptiness, but she didn't know it could feel so barren. But she told me, eventually she discovered a new kind of faith that rose directly out of her depressive thoughts and emotions. She was shocked to feel it stir in that deep, empty pit. She didn't know what to think of it because it was so different from the kind of faith she learned about and nurtured all her life. It was inseparable from her illness and her incapacity. Within this new brand of spirituality, however, she uncovered a profound peace. She no longer craved comfort from the hospital chaplain or anyone else. She said she found it difficult to describe this new trust she felt because it was so deep and different from the faith she'd been cultivating in her previous spiritual practices. There was more individuality in this faith. It was tied closer than could be imagined to her own identity and her illness. She had found what she needed the only way she could. Alone. Not long after she told me the story of her loss and recovery of faith, she died peacefully. I didn't pick a story with a happy ending, like she recovered fully. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And that was her journey of faith, to discover the deep level of faith she'd always been looking for. And that's what was needed for her to have that experience. For us this morning, we have the opportunity to realize that if, like her, in her first level of faith, we've been hoping to be delivered, whether it be a healing, a religious leader, a new guy in the White House, just tap into that feeling of wanting to be delivered. You know, and Independence Day, that big budget science fiction film, the aliens show up and a bunch of people go running up on top of a high rise. Welcome, we love you. And they zap those people. That wasn't a happy ending either. The urge to deliverance, the feeling that we'll be delivered, we'll be saved, runs so deep. And I think it's a wonderful thing, but it's not the end. It's not the end of the journey. Her journey took her into another level of faith. And for us, I mean, even just consider her story. What if she'd had a miraculous healing and survived? Guess what? A number of years later, she would have died. We all do. When you're young, it's just like this impossible thing. You get older, it's closer. And this unimaginable event is coming for me and for you. Am I going to be ready for it? So I can say, well, that was a life I lived. Pretty happy. I was with my mother the 3 days before she died, a wonderful human being who died with a lot of regret. I wish I'd done this, I wish I hadn't done that. When is the time to turn that around? Like, I wonder if that could be this morning, maybe. Where we say, wait a minute, I've got my whole life in front of me. I'm not going to wait for something. I'm going to live it right now, completely, fully. So I do have a nice poem to read. Sorry, Anya. This is from Rilke, one of my favorite poets. And this is the good news part of the visioning process here for us to come out of the depths. I wouldn't leave you there. And this poem has so much in it, we could spend hours. We could spend a day on this. I'm going to read it a couple of times. So first of all, just listen to it and enjoy the poetry. We're not supposed to analyze poetry with the left brain. It won't make a lot of sense first time through. I had to read it like 12 times to get anything out of it. So I'll do my best to speed that up for you. As once the winged energy of delight carried you over your own childhood's dark abysses, now beyond your own life, build the greatest arch of unimagined bridges. Wonders happen if we can succeed in passing through the harshest danger. But only in the bright and purely granted achievement can we realize the wonder. To work with things in the indescribable relationship is not too hard for us. The pattern grows more intricate and subtle, and being swept along is not enough. Take your practiced powers and stretch them out until they span the chasm between two contradictions. For the God wants to know himself in you. A lot in there. So let's just go through it for a couple of minutes. As once the winged energy of delight carried you over childhood's dark abysses, we grew up. We survived childhood trauma. Our parents did what they did. We all survived that with our wounds, but here we are, carrying us over those abysses. Now, beyond your own life, build the greatest arch of unimagined bridges. Have you ever considered what you might do after you die? I have big plans. Imagine that, if life was not ended with death. There's plenty of accounts that say it isn't. Beyond your own life, build a great arch of unimagined bridges. I get that, the feeling of that. Wonders happen if we can succeed in passing through the harshest danger. Make a list. What is the harshest danger? There's all kinds of them, but one of them is death. You pass through that. But only in a bright and purely granted achievement can we realize the wonder. You just did that when you imagined walking out the door. Easy to practice. Using the imagination to vision the future. Right? Get into the field of wonder. To work with things in the indescribable relationship, in the field, is not too difficult for us. The pattern grows more intricate and subtle. So the more we do this kind of imaginative work, like I took you down into a dark place, reading that story, and now we're coming up into a lighter place, so we can feel the rune changing, our emotions are changing, it's a different part of the story. The more we do this, the more we become facile at working with our energy instead of just digging holes. We know how to run our energy. And this is my favorite line in the poem. And being swept along is not enough. Get that? Not enough. 8 years of democratic apathy. For all the good that was done, we can look back and say, oh, we weren't really listening to those guys in the Rust Belt. Is enough to get everybody off the sidelines. It's not enough to be swept along anymore. We need to participate. Take your practiced powers, so we've been practicing this morning. You'll take them out the door when you leave, and stretch them out until they span the chasm between two contradictions. The way things are and the way we envision them being. Impossible. How would we ever get from A to B? It all starts with vision. If you can dream it, you can create it. How do we put a man on the moon and bring him back, for those who believe that actually happened? Couldn't resist. John F. Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely. And he galvanized the imagination of a nation. And what was seen as being impossible became possible. How many impossible things are there in your life, in my life, that could become possible if I was able to span the chasm between two contradictions? Here's my second favorite line. For the God wants to know himself in you. The God wants to know herself in you, in me. I wrote an article for Energy Medicine magazine and used some of this stuff, and at the end of it, my last line, we writers, love our last lines. And being swept along is not enough anymore. We long to know and experience consciously that we are the gods we've been waiting for. I live in devotion to my experience of divinity. And those who step up and provide an example of that, whether they're men of the cloth, women of the cloth, or inspirational speakers, I have so much respect for anyone who does that. And I know that it's up to all of us. We're all special. We all have something to bring. We are the gods we've been waiting for. What can gods do? Create. Gods create. So we're alchemists. And what do alchemists do? Transform. And how do they do that? They take raw materials and put them together, and then they heat them up, often. And something unknown is created by the combination of different ingredients. The principle of baking, putting flour, whatever, and you get a cake. We're creator gods with the ability to dream the future. But here's the thing. All of this is completely theoretical. I mean, it might be an enjoyable theory, but it's theoretical until we actually get that all of this has already happened. Already happened. The future is here, as surely as the past is here. And we have a choice in how we navigate. What kind of future do we want? What if I individually, you individually, what if we could create a bright and beautiful future? What a contradiction. But what if we could do that from a conviction that we had already done it? That it already happened. That it is alive in us. I'm living that. I'm having that experience. Even racing to Medford in an ambulance. And so this is the challenge of the hour. And I'd like to leave you with this opportunity. We're going to have some music while I do a little prayer.
Sure. We'll go into a song.
Yeah.
We have some instruments.
So we'll do a little meditation here. And I'm really hopeful that as you leave and go out into the rest of your lives, that you'll gestate on all this stuff and start to see opportunities for making different choices. They say in this book, Power versus Force, that when they enumerate people, one person up at 700 can match 70 million people below 200.
What?
And saints, like Christ, was at 1,000. And he handled the whole planet. So we are immensely powerful in every little incremental gain we can get. To be visioning the future and living it makes a huge, huge difference. We don't need to wait for deliverance. We don't need to wait for other people to change. It's all about me. So, I'd like to lead you in a little meditation. If you'd like to close your eyes. What if you could relax in these moments? Let go of thoughts and concerns. Just surrender yourself for these few minutes to being here and pick up your life later. What if this was the moment you'd been waiting for? That long list of things that needed to improve was gone. Because you have a different kind of faith that comes from yourself. What if you could imagine a future for our children and grandchildren, our great-grandchildren? A future filled with love and peace, where everyone belonged, regardless of their differences. Imagine living that way now, as if it was already true. What if you could walk out the door this morning feeling like you changed somehow? And that the change had come from the future. Your future self reaching back to love you today, this Sunday morning, here in Ashland, Oregon. Imagine what it would be like to live beyond time. Traveling in deep, deep time, visioning all the way. Imagine what this world could be like if enough of us lived this way. What if this could be real, not just a meditation and unity on Sunday morning?